Welcome to the newest episode of Beyond the Fame with Jason Fraley. I'm your host, Jason Fraley, picking the brains of the top filmmakers, musicians, and artists of our time. Emmylou Harris performs at Capital One Hall in Tysons, Virginia on October 28th for the Lantern Tour to raise money for the Women's Refugee Commission. I spoke with her about the humanitarian cause, as well as her iconic career evolving from folk music to country standards like Two More Bottles of Wine. Hey, Miss Harris, thanks so much for joining us on WTOP.
I'm happy to be joining you.
Now we're talking because you are headlining what's called the Lantern Tour. It's going to be at the brand new Capital One Hall, October 28th in Tysons Corner, Virginia. And then I know it's going to hit some other cities in Pennsylvania and New Jersey after that, all next weekend. But explain how you were contacted by the Women's Refugee Commission. They're the ones putting this together. You know what? Give us a sense of like what's sort of the mission of that commission and sort of the goal of the tour here.
Well, the Women's Refugee Commission, has been working for decades on behalf of refugees, especially women and children. And I have a very good friend, Gail Griffith, from the Washington, D.C. area. We started doing these in the round shows in the last century, actually back in the 90s. On a campaign for a landmine-free world. And we got the idea to do this in the round format, which I'm not really headlining, by the way. I'm just kind of the one that gets to go first. But it's an in the round, with these other wonderful artists, Steve Earle and Amy Helm, Larry and Teresa Campbell, Gabby Marino, and Tao, who's I've done a show with her before too. So it's an in the round where everyone sort of takes a turn doing a song. There's a lot of conversation and interaction. It's very spontaneous. The shows are always different. We never know what anyone is going to do on any particular night. So it's a lovely kind of intimate show where you're almost like in someone's living room. And it started as a guitar pull that we used to call it. And now it's sort of become an in the round. But we're really hoping to shine a light on the crisis now that's happening with displaced people, refugees around the world. I think that there are probably over 60 million displaced persons now, which is more than after World War II. And something has to be done. We obviously want to raise money for the good work, the extraordinary work that the Women's Refugee Commission does. In helping these folks and communicate to so that the audience will be aware of the breadth of the problem if they are not already. And so it's basically a fundraising and a consciousness raising event.
Great. Well, it's definitely a great cause. And it sounds like, you and the fellow artists are going to be playing in the round. Are you able to give us a little tidbit on what we might hear you perform specifically? Do you know what, I don't want to ruin the set list per se, but what will you be performing?
I have no idea. The point is that you kind of songs that work in that intimate setting where you don't have a band, you don't have a drummer and all that stuff. But I've done so many of these in the rounds over the years. Basically, you're stripping down those songs, whether it's something you wrote or something that you worked up from someone else. And you're hearing that really the bare bones of the song, and a good song can work, in any situation. And I particularly enjoy them because I have the best seat in the house. All of the artists do, because it's a show where we're performing, but we're also a part of the audience. We just happen to be on the stage.
Well, it'll be a great show, especially with all those other artists you listed too. Whenever I have someone of your stature on, I love to hear sort of your whole journey, so I know you were born in Birmingham, Alabama, and you grew up in like a military family, right? What wasn't a lot of our listeners might not know, wasn't your father like actually a POW?
He was a POW in the Korean War. He was in the World War II, and then he sort of got out of the service. I mean, he was still in, so that when the Korean conflict occurred, they still call it a conflict. He went back in and he was shot down. He had only been over there, I think about 10 days, if that. And so he spent the war in a prisoner of war camp. And actually, we did not know until he was actually released whether he was officially listed as missing in action. So we didn't know really whether he was dead or alive. And I was only 5 at the time. But I know it was really hard on my mother. But she always said that she knew. She knew in her heart that, and we were lucky he came back to us, even though he had been tortured in the prison camp. We were lucky he came back to us whole, physically and mentally, emotionally. He had that wonderful wife, to come back to, and his 2 children. So we were very fortunate as a military family whose father saw two wars.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that's sort of the military side of it. But while you and mom back home, you're growing up. How did you get into music? What sort of stuff was playing around the house? And how did you get bit by the bug? I guess.
Well, I would say that probably it was definitely I was in high school because I really didn't consider, I was considered musical. I played in the marching band, and my parents tried to give me piano lessons. I wasn't interested. But when I discovered the folk music through the folk music revival that happened around there in the 60s, and I got my first guitar and wanted to be Joan Baez and learned every 3-chord song I could. That was when I got bitten by that bug, and I guess I never looked back.
Wow, yeah, and you really didn't look back because you went on to study at what was it, University of North Carolina, Greensboro.
Well, yeah,
I
but I
guess.
was a drama major. I really thought I was going to be an actress, as a great actress, but music, I guess, kind of quickly took over. I didn't really ever study music. I would play whenever I could around campus, and then eventually quit school, and just took myself to New York City, where I became a waitress.
Now, what restaurants are any of them still standing?
Hopefully not. But no, I left and actually went back home. I had married and had a daughter, and my marriage broke up, and I went back home to mommy, and my parents, my father had retired from the Marine Corps by then, and they had settled in Clarksville, Maryland. And
That's right here by where we are at our radio
yes,
stations, right here in DC.
that's right. And so I started sort of coming back into DC with my guitar and started playing. My parents were a great help with my infant daughter, that allowed me to go in and start working in the clubs, Tammany Hall and Clyde's, and the Child Herald, the Assembly, wherever I could work. And I was in one of those clubs at Clyde's when I met Graham Parsons, and went on to work with him on 2 records before he died.
Now, which
And
Clyde's was this? Was this the one in Georgetown?
oh yeah, the Clyde's enjoyed. I think it was the only one at the time.
Right. Then they expanded, I think, with other ones over in Chinatown, and then there's one actually right by our station up near the Bethesda line, Chevy Chase area. But
And they
yeah, you're
also
right.
started the Hamilton, and they've been wonderful at giving me a fundraiser every year for my dog rescue that I started here in Nashville.
Oh yeah, Clyde's and the Hamilton are fixtures around here, and yeah, you'll see your name on the bill at the Hamilton constantly, like at least once a year there.
Well, we're hoping to do it. We couldn't do it last year because of the pandemic. I'm hoping we can start it up again this year, but eventually I will be back for my annual fundraiser for Bonaparte's Retreat, my dog rescue.
Oh, for sure. All dogs in the area will appreciate that, including my wife and I's little dog. They appreciate that. Hey, real quick, I want to double back to, we mentioned, the waiting tables in New York, but I don't want to skip over the main thing up there, which was, you were performing at, different places, coffee shops and things around Greenwich Village. Just talk about how that sort of helped shape you.
Well, I think anytime as an unknown, you have to get in front of an audience and make them listen to you. And sometimes they don't, and sometimes they do. You have to really love it. Because sometimes you can feel like you're just treading water. I know by the time I left New York with my infant daughter in tow, I was pretty much thought that music was not going to be my future. And because Washington, D.C. was such an extraordinary music town, not the way New York and Austin and Nashville and LA, but local music. It really supported local music. And there were wonderful art groups there, you know, Fat City, which became Starland Vocal Band, and Roberta Flack came from there, and Mary Chapin, because there were lots of clubs. And I think maybe being a college town, there were lots of places for people to come, and you could actually build your own audience. You could build your own following from the ground up. None of us had record deals, you know, so you were finding yourself, you were finding your voice, you were finding your repertoire. You know, I mean, there's no substitute for, you know, having to pay your dues and pay the rent.
Yeah, you paid your dues, and you mentioned, Graham Parsons is sort of, you know, discovered you down here. And talk about starting to work with him, right before he passed.
Well, I just did the 2 records with him, and we did one tour with a group called Fallen Angels, and so it was a blow, you know, to lose Graham, who was really my mentor and really turned my head toward country music, because before that I was a stone cold folky, you know, and actually didn't have a very high opinion of country music, which, you know, I'm very humble to say that now. I didn't hear the beauty and the poetry and the, you know, in country music until I started working with Graham.
What would you say? I mean, I want to keep the chronological journey going, but just stepping back for 1 second, what would you say to other people maybe that just like you sort of thought down on country music, either back then or even today? What would you say to them to help open their eyes to the beauty of what is, one of my favorite genres?
Well, I would say listen to George Jones and Merle Haggard. And well, there's just so much to it, you know, and you have uh, 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 the bluegrass that also was kind of right in between. You know, you got those crossroads with country music, hardcore country, mountain music, and hardcore bluegrass, and so much of American music. Well, right now it's sort of become Americana. So. But you have to find your own voice. And when I say that, I'm not just talking about the physical voice, but the music that really melts your butter, you know, and makes you want to get up there night after night. And it's all those different streams of music come together, because we're able to hear everything now. All music is available now. You know, you just go on the internet and you can find all kinds of music. But everyone, I think, has to find their own voice.
Well, I'm glad you came around to appreciate it there back, back thanks to Graham Parsons. So, and then after that, how were you approached by Warner Brothers? Wasn't they formed it was called the Hot Band. Explain, remind our listeners about that era of your career.
Well, of course, Graham was a Warner reprise artist. And so I had that connection because I had sung so much on those 2 records, those 2 solo records that he did. And in fact, I think that the people at Warner Brothers assumed that I was under contract. But when they found out I wasn't, they found me, and I was able to get that contract.
Great, great. Well, we'd be here all day if we talked about all of your hits, but if you don't mind, I'd love to drill down on just a couple of them. If you have time, tell me about Together Again. I think that was your first number one, I believe.
I'm trying to
I
think.
knew if I could only win your love reached pretty high, and then Together Again might have been.
Together Again might have been my first one. I don't really keep track of that, but yeah, that was just a great song, which Buck Owens had a hit on it. So, but I guess my audience were. Uh, I think I might have brought some people who weren't into country music before into it, but I always was able, you know, try to tip the hat to the people that had inspired me, you know, like Buck Owens and those great country stars.
Well, yeah. So that was, you said that was, reprising a Buck Owens hit. And then, of course, you also took on the legendary Patsy Cline, Sweet Dreams, and made that a number one record too. What was sort of the trick to taking a voice so iconic as the late Patsy Cline and making it your own?
Well, if I like a song, I just don't worry about it. I just learn to sing it. I had a great band and a great producer, and that is a great song. So I guess the time, and we had recorded that live. It wasn't sort of recorded in the studio. It was, we recorded it live at the Roxy in LA. It was sort of the last hurrah of the hot band version with James Burton. But then we had Albert Lee step in, so we didn't really miss a beat, and we had two very iconic, lead guitar players in my band, as well as Frank Record, who came in later. So I was really lucky to have these wonderful musicians.
For sure. And then I know the one that most of our listeners will probably think of, as maybe like your career song. They say your name, then they'll think of Two More Bottles of Wine. Why do you think that one works so well? Or do you have any cool stories of recording that one?
No, we just, we would always go in the studio, and I was looking, because at that point, I wasn't really writing. So I was always trying to find songs that other people had written. And Delbert, I love that record of his, that particular record. And we needed an up-tempo song, so we just threw it out one night. And I don't know what a hit record is. I really don't. And fortunately, I haven't had to live and die by hit records. My somehow my audience will listen to whatever I put out. So, and I don't have to play the hits every night if I don't want to. It's mostly album cuts, and that I probably why I've been around so long, because I don't ever get tired of anything.
Yeah, for sure. Well, listeners never got tired either. A lot of your fans will remember Blue Kentucky Girl. That album had, obviously the title track, I think won you a Grammy, but Beneath Still Waters as well. Like that was such a big album in your career. Do you look back fondly at that album particularly?
Well, I do, because the record company, that was one time when I had gone so far into the country weeds that they didn't really know how to promote it. And then it won the Grammy, and somehow it was like, oh yeah, this one is okay too. So I I'm not ever going after the hits. For me, it's a bunch of songs that I really love that I want to record. And then if you have a hit, great. But I haven't had to live and die by the hits on the radio.
For sure. Well, certain ones hits or not live on. Like, tell me about Bluebird Wine. I mean, I feel like that might be one of your most, cherished ones and celebrated ones, at least for country fans.
Oh, really? Well, for me, it's special because it was the first time I ever heard Rodney Crowell. It was a demo that Brian played me, and I knew immediately that this guy had the right stuff. And so that was the beginning of a, almost 50-year friendship. And the fact that, we did 2 albums together, Rodney and I. So that was sort of the beginning of something, a relationship that's been really important to me.
I mean, I encourage listeners to check out Boulder to Birmingham, Get Up John, so many. But yeah, let's circle back around before we run to the reason we're here, which is the Lantern Tour, Women's Refugee Commission. Why is this such an urgent time for a concert tour like this?
Well, right now, besides the gender equality and all the issues that the Women's Refugee Commission has been putting their extraordinary energy and time and effort into, we have a crisis of displaced persons, over 60 million, and it's growing. And so that's, I think, probably the main focus right now. That was what got me into it. Through a friend of mine who was very aware of the issue, and put together this tour, and we did one a couple of years ago too. So this is the biggest crisis of displaced persons since World War II, and something has to be done about it. So this is basically a fundraiser to address all the issues that the Women's Refugee Commission is dealing with. But I think this one is it is really enormous right now. And we want to raise money, but we also want to raise people's consciousness and open their hearts and minds to what's going on around the world.
Are there particular areas in the world that that they're focusing on? Do you know?
I think it's all, this is happening everywhere. And of course, now we have Afghanistan, the most recent one. But, and we have it right here at our own borders, the Mexican border. This is going on. So this is a very a momentous time in world history. And we'll see how we step up as a civilization, if we lead with our hearts or not, if we close ourselves off or if we open ourselves up.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for doing the tour. Again, it's at the brand new Capital One Hall in Tysons Corner, Virginia. It just opened a couple weeks ago. It'll be on October 28th. And I guess it might be our area's first time seeing you perform live since the Kennedy Center honors. And memories of that really quick before we run. I mean, so you mentioned Joan Baez was such a inspiration to you growing up, but that must have been really cool to join some of your fellow legendary musicians. There was a couple of you on stage getting to salute the legend herself.
It was me and Mary Chapin doing
Okay.
We Shall Overcome. You have to understand that being asked to, first of all, sort of do the tribute to her, I videotaped something when they thought that they weren't going to actually have the event. I had to write something, and I felt the weight of the generation on top of me to say all the accolades that so many of us around the time that Joan came, burst upon the world with that glorious voice, and all that she has done, not just for music, but for human rights around the world. She sort of is so iconic that I felt that the weight of a generation to come up with the right words to truly honor her. And then they said, well, we actually decided we want you to perform. And I love Mary Chapin Carpenter so much. I love her work. I love her voice. Singing with her for Joan Baez is probably one of the highlights. Very stressful going into it, but to have that, to have been able to be blessed enough and honored enough to be a part of an honor for this woman who I owe so much to, for inspiring me to pick up a guitar in the first place. That was something. It really was.
Yeah. Doesn't get much bigger than that, and singing We Shall Overcome. But it was a different year too. It was like a hybrid of virtual and in-person, things around the Kennedy Center campus. And I guess let's sort of end there. It's been a really heartaching, last depressing in a way 18 months, but some silver linings of inspiration throughout as well. But what's sort of your, how shall we say it, prayer for the world? And how did you manage?
Well, we were all being around our family and our close friends. I was actually able to do some shows, some benefits. I also work for animal rights, and I have a dog rescue, my own dog rescue, and I work with another social enterprise that helps at-risk youth work with homeless animals. So I was able to do some shows over the pandemic because one of our local clubs, the City Winery, created a performance space in their parking lot. So every few months I was able to do a benefit with different friends would show up of mine, different musicians who live in town. And we were able to raise money for the animals and for the young people. So it wasn't like going out on tour, but it was still playing music with my friends. They made it a very safe situation. They streamed it instead of having packed houses. They had only a few people in the audience, and there was separation. Everyone had to be their temperature taken and everything. So, and that's still going on. I've got a couple of shows coming up next month, one with Buddy Miller and one with Rodney Crowell at the winery. So I guess it was just enough, to keep the juices flowing and not my vocal cords rust over. And then the gigs started coming back in May. The gigs that had been postponed started coming back in May. So I've been going out maybe a couple of times a month with my band, mostly outdoor shows. And the indoor shows, everyone is masked. So I've been really lucky, I guess. I was able to float and then do enough shows to just sort of keep everything going.
Definitely. Well, we're glad, you're back out there, especially for this event. Again, everyone, it is the Women's Refugee Commission is putting on, it's called the Lantern Tour. It kicks off October 28th at the new Capital One Hall in Tysons Corner, Virginia, before hitting Pennsylvania and New Jersey on the 29th and 30th. But head over to Capital One Hall first on the 28th and see a bunch of great performers, including the legendary Emmylou Harris. So, hey, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for shining a light on this effort. Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us on Beyond the Fame with Jason Fraley. Remember to hit the subscribe button and give us a 5-star rating if you like what you hear. We'll see you next time. I wanted to take a second to tell you about an app I really enjoy. Living in the DC area is great, and Podcast DC gathers all of the local shows that I like all in one local app. Health, sports, local news, politics, and so much more. Podcast DC is the new local app with hundreds of DC area podcasts to choose from. I can earn exciting rewards just for listening and share the podcasts I love instantly. Available in the App Store or in Google Play, listen local with Podcast DC.